Okay, welcome everyone on Instagram, on Zoom, on Facebook. I am so grateful to have you here today. I have two screens, they're on top of each other, so my eyes might go up and down a little bit, but I'm thrilled to have you all here and I look forward to sharing with you. We've got notes, we've got products with sticky tabs, so there's a lot to cover. But first, what I wanted to share with you, just to get us started, today's discussion is all about how to teach spelling, punctuation, and grammar, the way that we do it in Brave Writer. And just to give you an overview, we do come from a pedagogical point of view. We are not just making it up. This is not just a product I made in my spare time. My team and I have been studying all of the issues related to spelling, punctuation, and grammar. This isn't something that we just do for fun. It's something that we actually value and have gone to the research to make sure that what we're doing actually has all of the oomph that you are looking for when you bring our practices into your space. So we have 4 programs: the Dart, the Arrow, the Boomerang, and the Slingshot. And these cover a range of ages from 8 all the way to 18. You can read about each one and their specific book lists. I'm going to explain a little more about that in a second, in our store. And so if you go to store.bravewriter.com and click on the special offer button, you can read all about what those programs do and our special offer. So let me tell you the offer first, and then we're going to talk about the contents, because not everyone will be here at the end, and I need you to know that June is special. During the month of June, if you purchase one of our year-long programs, Dart, Arrow, or Boomerang, or you purchase the Slingshot in the College Prep Bundle, all of those that I just mentioned cost $129, you automatically get added to Brave Learner Home, which is our community space where we train you all year to use these products. In other words, you will be in a community of people all reading the same books at the same time, asking the same questions, wondering how to implement with a dyslexic child or a dysgraphic child, or worried about some feature of one of the books and how to talk about it with your kids. That all happens in Brave Learner Home. And the only way you get access to that is if you buy the year-long program, not just individual issues. So for those of you who are already in, you know what I'm talking about, and you can even share in comments the value you've gotten from Brave Learner Home. There are trainings that we did all last year, Dawn, my team member, and myself, and we will do new and more trainings this year. So we'll walk you through how to do copywork, walk you through how to use dictation with all different ages, walk you through the value of literary analysis at the high school level. And this year, we are going to read the books that go with the Slingshot as adults. So you can have like an adult discussion around those books so that you are ready to work with your 15 to 18-year-old kids. So the Brave Learner Home offer is for the month of June only. Then we go to our other offer, which is you spend $198 on total product purchase to get in. So this is the lowest price of the year, $129. Purchase a year-long program or the College Prep Bundle, and you'll be added to Brave Learner Home in addition to all that amazing curriculum. So let's get right to it. What is the philosophical core of how Brave Writer approaches grammar, spelling, and punctuation? Most of you, if you remember being in school or in a traditional educational environment, you remember being drilled. You are taught a verb is an action word or a state of being. An adjective describes a noun. A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. How many of you remember that? Do you remember that experience? And so you might assume that the best instruction method is sort of what they call drill and kill. You give the definition, you share some examples, you do some worksheets, and then you take a test. And you have to ask yourself, well, what was the goal of all that? Like, why is it that my kids have to pass a test about prepositional phrases? I mean, does it affect their fluency in speech? Are they less capable of articulating what they think in writing because they don't know that the word of is a preposition? Or are they going to use the word of correctly because they're fluent native speakers? The truth is, for most of us, because English is our first language, we end up fluently self-expressing when we go to writing. We're not consulting a bunch of rules to conjugate a verb or to figure out what tense of verb to use. We're not asking ourselves whether or not an article goes in front of a noun. It's so natural to us that when we ask kids to apply this level of abstraction, like an article is used either specifically or non-specifically in front of a noun to indicate a specific one or a non-specific one, like that language is like, phew, just flies over the head of an 8-year-old. And of course it does. They're speaking fluently. They know where to use the word the and when to use the word a. So all we're doing is we're adding like this sophisticated abstract vocabulary on top of language that they're already good at using. That's why they don't hold on to it. And in case you don't know, elementary and junior high school and even high school teach grammar every single year. Why? Because it doesn't stick. This sort of abstract analysis over grammar ends up Tefloning off of your child's fluent speech. So what we want to do instead, what we're trying to help our kids experience is what we would call contextualized learning. In the sort of field of academics and education, they talk about it as descriptive versus prescriptive learning. Now, descriptive is the kind you're used to. Here's a verb, this is how we define it, go find it, use it, pass a test for it. And a great example of how this worked happened in a research study that I looked up for today's webinar, because it's such a good one. Basically what they did is they gathered a group of 10th graders and they gave them the definition. They said, tell us the definition of a verb. And the 10th graders all came back very easily with, oh, well, it's either an action being performed by someone or it's a state of being. So then they gave them the sentence, you know, my dog was running in the backyard. And they asked them to identify the verb. And the students said running, because running is often, if we say, what's an action that you do, people pick running. It's a very easy one to say. So then the researchers pivoted and they said, well, what if we give you this sentence? The new red running track is located at the junior high school. Well, now the students said running again, because they were thinking in terms of this definition of running being action, it must be a verb. But as we know in that context, running is next to the word track, which is an adjective. It's a description. So this word just did a complete personality transformation, just in 2 different sentences. And when we train our kids to be definition oriented, they can even justify their own understanding accurately and still not have it right. So prescriptive teaching is completely different. Prescriptive teaching orients itself to the context. So instead of looking at a sentence and deciding in advance what a verb is and then finding that verb in a sentence, we actually study the sentence. We get to know the sentence. We get to know the information that the sentence is conveying. What kind of track? It's new, it's red. What other kind of track? It's running. Where's the track? It's at the high school. What is the track doing? It's just at the high school. And we start to have conversation around that. So what that means is that we want our students to be able to see the sentence, get to know its contents, understand the context of the language, and then feel comfortable analyzing it, making judgments about it. I often ask families when we're talking about grammar, and we'll talk about spelling and punctuation too, what part of speech is the word table? How many of you know? If I say the word table, what part of speech do you automatically say? I'm going to check the chat here and see what people say. Anybody? Anybody? Noun. How many of you think table is a noun? Ah, I see a couple of tricky people saying it's a verb, and oh, even one saying it could be an adjective. The truth is, we can say, sit at the table, it's a noun. We could say, let's table this conversation till later, that's a verb. But then what if we say, can you give my son a crew cut so that it's tabletop flat? So his hair is tabletop flat. Now it's an adjective. So when we say, oh, well, let's teach our kids a noun, and then we start naming all these nouns, we're actually foreclosing the flexibility of language. We're actually taking away options from our kids. They are now thinking in this more rudimentary way. So what Brave Writer does, and what I invite you to consider, is actually using this more prescriptive style of education, where we look at the writing itself and we start to ask meaningful questions about it, and then we discover together what the actions are of all these various words as they relate to each other in a sentence or a paragraph or in an entire novel. I remember with my kids getting caught up in the poem Jabberwocky, all the sort of nonsensical invented language that Lewis Carroll uses. And yet we somehow felt like we understood what the poem was about. How is that possible? It's possible because we are actually reading the words in context, and we are drawing clues from language construction, from the familiar sounds, from the way that Lewis Carroll borrowed from our fluency in English to help us understand the sense. But even then, we can make decisions. We could say 'twas brillig, it was sunny, an adjective, or it was morning, a noun. Brillig is ambiguous. It depends on how we define it. So inside our Brave Writer program, like the dart, the arrow, and the boomerang, and now the slingshot, we are going to help you go on those kinds of word hunts so that you aren't just teaching the verb, the noun. And we're going to give you meaningful ways to engage with language. So in this old Charlotte's Web dart, so this is for like 8 to 10-year-olds, we have a place where we talk about a specific passage. And in our products, they last for a month, and they each have 4 passages that we feature in Copywork and Dictation. And then we examine those passages in detail for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So here is an example where we talk about synonyms and trying to understand synonyms. Now I ask you, when I say the word synonym, do you think of the part of speech adjective, verb, noun, prepositions? What are synonyms? They are 2 words that share a similar meaning that could be sort of exchanged, like dollars for euros, right? Like it's a currency exchange. They have similar experiential character or properties. And yet so often, if I hear the word synonym, I immediately go to adjectives because descriptors. But we have synonyms for the word barked, like think of a dog, woofed, roughed, yelped, right? So when we're thinking about teaching something like synonyms, we're actually involving grammar. We're pulling our children into the world of grammar through the delight of a literary device. So in here, one of the beauties of this passage that was this week's passage inside the dart, let me just read you the passage. Wilbur looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window ledge, stared up at the ceiling, but he saw nothing new. Now, if you hear that passage, the first thing that leapt out at me when I was reading the book and selecting it for this dart was that E.B. White had to keep us interested. And so what he did is he found as many versions of sight in verb form that he could. So let's read it again, and I want you to listen for all the sight words, for anything that uses your eyes, and see if you can count up how many there are. Wilbur looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window ledge, stared up at the ceiling, but he saw nothing new. How many did you come up with? Did you come up with 5? That's right, 5. And so can you imagine, instead of saying to your kids, let's learn about verbs. A verb is this. Can you find the verbs? What if we have them close their eyes, listen to the passage, and you ask them, Tell me how many ways Wilbur saw in this passage, how many ways he used his eyes. And then what if you asked your children to act out each one? So Wilbur looked everywhere. He's looking. He searched his pen thoroughly. I mean, I don't know. I hear the word search and my hand goes over my eyes to be more intentional. He examined the window ledge. Now I'm like, okay, I'm going to get really close. I'm going to really look. I'm going to really examine. He stared up at the ceiling. And then, but he saw nothing new. Kind of looking around, just relaxed, right? Like each one of those verbs carries power. It has vitality. It creates meaning for the child. So what we do is we slow you down. We're not just trying to get through things. We're trying to give your children what I would call a gestalt, like a felt sense of what we're talking about when we say synonyms or we say verbs. We're not just delivering information to test them at the end of the week to check off the box that it was done. And here's what we hear back from our parents. When we use these tactics with our kids, they come back a month later and they say, Mom, I was reading this other book, you know, the Vanderbeekers or Nancy Drew or whatever they read. And they're like, I found another one of those verbs, a synonym for sight. Here's another one. I never even thought about it until I was just reading and bam, it hit me. That's what we hear. We hear kids coming back and they'll suddenly remember the game we played with prepositional phrases. So I'm going to show you for prepositions, those tiny little words that we don't know what to do with. How do we teach them? How do we get them to notice? We have them take a chair. And then we say things like, let's see if I can help you see me do this. We'll see if I can do it for you. So we say on, below, next, you know, beside, above, and we start acting it out. Why? Because kids need to use their bodies. That's how they make meaning for themselves. That's how they retain what you teach them. So throughout our guides, throughout our handbooks, the dart, the arrow, the boomerang, we have activities. One of my favorite activities last year was we asked kids to write adjectives on Post-it notes and stick them all over the house. And this one dad came back on Instagram and his kids had put Post-it notes all over him, describing him. That's what we're trying to encourage inside our program, and we write it all out for you to make it easy. So grammar is taught contextually. Here's the million-dollar question. Is that enough? Well, the good news is this. When you use a prescriptive form of teaching grammar, your kids apply it to their original writing. According to this massive study that these researchers did with 10th graders, they discovered that when they went on what we would call detective hunts, looking at sentences, analyzing them like CSI experts of language, that those kids started to feel the power and flexibility of language. And so when they were measured against their peers who had been taught in the descriptive method, where they define the term and then tell them to perform on a worksheet or a test, they noticed that both had accurate understanding of nouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositional phrases, etc. But the kids who had been taught prescriptively, contextually, were better writers. They showed more power in their writing because they felt like language was a toolkit at their disposal instead of, okay, I learned all this over here, but it has nothing to do with what I'm doing down here. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that validating? And the thing is, we've been doing this 21 years and we see that exact truth bear itself out in our classes, in our students, in the stories that our families tell us. So yes, I can find a link to the study and share it out. I will do that. It's in an academic journal though, so I don't know if you'll have access to it, but it's a great study. It was done with 10th graders, really great study. So the DART for our younger students, for our 8 to 10-year-olds, really starts at that very basic level. So I want to pivot for a moment to punctuation with the younger level. And I've got something to show you in the arrow and something to show you in the boomerang as well. So hang in there. We're going to do all the ages 8 all the way up to 18. So within our world of teaching kids, we've got this grammar piece where, you know, we're teaching them the abstract language around the language they already speak fluently. But then we have yet another language we're expecting our kids to learn, and it's called punctuation. Punctuation is a silent language, and it is made up of 3 kinds of marks. Who knows what the 3 kinds of marks are in American punctuation? There are only 3 kinds of marks. Who knows? See if anybody does. All right, I'm going to tell you. Dots, curves, and lines. That's it. Dots, curves, and lines. If you start with the understanding that punctuation is just somebody's good idea of what to put on the page to make you do something when you read, you stop seeing it as like the rules about how to do things right. There is so much emphasis on accuracy in writing when what we really want is power. We want power in writing. Accuracy matters, but it's accuracy under the rule of the author, of the subjectivity of the writer. So you can even recognize sometimes how a writer writes. Like, for instance, clearly I said eternal vows to the M dash. Like, that is my best friend. That is my lifelong partner. That is my dreamboat. Because the M dash helps me express my personality in writing. It's a way for me to always attach that second thought, that additional insight, right? But there are people who use ellipses, people who use more commas than others, people who decided to get rid of dialogue punctuation. Hello, Cormac McCarthy, right? These are tools for self-expression, but our kids don't know that. So we teach them to read, and then all of a sudden we expect them to write perfectly using periods, capital letters, commas, colons, semicolons, and dashes, question marks, and exclamation points. We just assume that because they can read, they're generating meaning every time they see a dot, a line, or a curve. But that's not what's happening. Because they are fluent in English and they are reading fluently, here's what's happening to them. They are supplying the intonation, and their eyes are just running roughshod over the punctuation, as though it's not even there. And so the only way that our kids actually start to experience the power of punctuation is when you overuse it or take it away, and you start training them to obey the dots, the commas, the curves, and the lines. So one of our favorite practices that we do with our students, commanding commas in our punctuation spotlight. In the dart and the arrow, we spotlight punctuation and grammar like each month, and we'll have something that you can do with your kids that's an activity to make these things come to life. So we talk about commanding commas. Commas are like movie directors. They tell us how to read a story's lines the way the writer intended. Observe the way this comma shows it's time to pause for a dramatic effect. Our story begins in a city, comma, and you can just feel it like, oh, I'm being introduced. This is the opening scene of the movie. The director is guiding me in with his camera lens, and the comma makes me wait. We're helping our kids experience that comma, not just, hey, there's a comma, it comes after a clause, make sure you include it. Understand? So it's important to let that detail sink in, because the setting of this story in The Wild Robot Escapes is significant. Readers familiar with Roz know that she doesn't want to be in the city. She wants to be home on the remote island she was taken from. The comma helps readers slow down and take in that information. Commas also keep us organized. In another passage, commas help compose a list of unique actions happening in this scene. Humans were strolling. Automobiles were driving. Airships were flying. Robots were hard at work. So the comma helps us organize each of those groupings, right? So that we know what each of those are doing at the same time. Whew, that is a lot of action to keep straight. Thank you for your help, commas. So then we give you an activity. And here is our suggested activity. Place a comma between each word in the above sentence so it looks like this. It'll be hard to see on Instagram because it's backwards. Humans were strolling. Automobiles were driving. Airships were flying. Robots were hard at work. Do you notice how if I pause for each word and put a comma after each word, doing violence to the original sentence, I'm suddenly very aware that this little curve has some power. It's telling me how to behave, and it's actually ruining how the sentence should sound. Then we can do the other. We can take all the commas out and just read it. Humans were strolling, automobiles were driving, ships were flying, robots were hard at work. And suddenly it's all mashed together. We have a hard time separating those individual pieces. So then what I ask my kids to do, and we used to do this activity, they love the comma activity, I would ask them then to just read it the way they think it should sound. And do you know, their bodies, their voices, their mouths naturally paused in the right places. And I would hand them a pencil, put a comma there, put a comma there. We are training them to obey the punctuation marks they see so that they are internalizing this silent language that they can apply to their own writing. Can you see this sort of difference between just doing a worksheet where you always put a comma after every clause? This is how we start to inculcate inside of our children the understanding that grammar and punctuation actually influence the shape of the writing they do for themselves and their ability to decode and read meaningfully to themselves. So that's a little bit about how we do it. We've got this spotlight where we focus on punctuation, and all of those grammar and punctuation insights are tied to the passage of the week. So the dart, the arrow, the boomerang, the slingshot have a full month of material. And then we have 4 passages that we work through, and each one is going to have some spelling notes, some punctuation notes, some grammar notes. So now I want to pivot to spelling, and we're going to look at the boomerang for that. The boomerang level is for your kids who are like 13 and 14, beginning of high school. And one of the interesting, the boomerang that I'm sharing with you is from last year. It is Emma by Jane Austen. And one of the fun things about this level is that sometimes we get to include classic works of fiction like Tale of Two Cities or Emma that come from a British author, a UK writer, somebody who does not use American standards of punctuation and spelling, but uses the continental, the UK, right? The way that they spell and punctuate. So we get to share some of that detail with you and help your kids suddenly discover, wait, flavor, O-U-R? Oh, that's interesting. So we think there's a right spelling, but actually there are 2 right spellings depending on context, and they both have etymological origins. And we can start to even be more flexible about spelling. We can actually see that spelling is a part of this more complex system. And we are helping our kids enter it, not always on this nice edge of which thing is most true, accurate, right, 100% correct, versus which thing is utterly wrong, shows me to be a fraud, makes me look bad. Do you see how we're lowering the stakes around these 3 areas that are so critical? So inside Emma, we pulled out some words: considerable, merry, match, foretell, acceptable, deathbed, mizzle. There's a word. I think I want to use mizzle later today. That's a great word. Matchmaking. And so interestingly, in the original British version of Emma, she refers to a misty light drizzle of rain as a mizzle. I mean, come on. That is like, for me, catnip. Give me a word I've never heard, define it for me so I can use it. It's going to be showing up. You can expect it on Instagram later today. You know it. It's a real word that has fallen out of use. yet the sound of it perfectly fits that type of precipitation. In updating the book for a later publication, some of the publishers changed it to drizzle. What a loss. So at the boomerang level, we're going to give you insights like that. We're going to help you have this broader, contextualized, richer experience of spelling, grammar, and punctuation, even though we will still cycle through many of the same things. I mean, we're going to teach you interjection and exclamation points. We are going to show you punctuation fashions, so that if you are studying a different edition of the book than the one we selected and it's British, we're going to go through and show you that people make different choices around punctuation, and it's also based on grammar. So let me give you an example. Take a look at the gigantic sentence from this week's passage that begins with, "But on the other hand," and ends with, "She refused him." Highlight the whole sentence to isolate it. Now look at it. There are 5, yes, 5 independent clauses, all linked by semicolons. That's quite a mouthful. If this book were written and published today, it would likely be split into several shorter sentences. Try doing that now. So we're giving our kids more than just, okay, here's the information, here's what you can do with it clinically, and now I can check it off my list. No, what we're actually doing is we are helping you have what we love to call in Brave Writer, big, juicy conversations around the subjects of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Now, I know that some of you have asked questions around spelling, especially if you have a child who's struggling with any kind of reading issue like dysgraphia, dyslexia, or any of those language learning challenges. We actually know also from research that copywork and dictation, the 2 practices that we encourage throughout our products, do more to grow the reading skills, the spelling skills of your children than any spelling program's list of words. That said, some kids do benefit from a deep dive, a slower pace, a little more understanding behind the spelling conventions. And at that point, we do recommend going to Rooted in Language, which is our colleague Rita Savasco, who has a Brave Writer mentality, but also is a specialist in those struggles. Here's what I want to tell you. A lot of parents assume their kids have a diagnosis that they've actually never gotten just because a child turns a B backwards and it looks like a D, or the child seems to struggle with spelling. Here's what I want you to consider first. Take up a practice of copywork and dictation, which I'm going to explain next, and do it for several months and see if your child doesn't improve. Because here's the problem. Most of the spelling we ask our kids to do is in their original writing when their minds are focused on content. But if we actually sent our kids back to their own writing like 3 days later and asked them to use their editorial eye, they will catch some of those misspellings. They will see them because they're fluent readers and they can see them. So what we're looking for over time is for them to do copywork, something we call French style dictation. I'll explain that next. Regular dictation, and then something I created called reverse dictation, where we are training their editorial eye. We're helping them be careful. We're helping them come back to the page and make corrections where they see that they left something out or overlooked it or forgot to use it. But we're not expecting it in their original writing before they are starting to show consistency using somebody else's writing, using someone else's. I, for instance, did not ever mark my kids down in original writing for misspellings or missing punctuation. I would take a note in my mind and file that away and then find copywork that targeted those words or those punctuation marks so they could practice using someone else's writing. And once they got fluent doing it in that space where they didn't also have to think the thoughts, they could just copy or use someone else's words. Once they got fluent at that, I would make them a little note card, and when they did their own original writing, a day later, they'd pull out their writing and I'd, on the note card, write maybe 2 things or 3 things that they could look for. I could say, make sure you like all of your proper noun capitalization choices. Make sure you like your sentence ending choices, period, exclamation point, question mark. And while you're at it, I know that because has always been kind of a weird word for you to spell, but you've been doing so great in Copywork with the word because. Here it is written out. Just match this version against what you wrote on the page and make sure that it's the way you want it. I don't ever talk about it as mistakes because they're not mistakes. They are best attempts under the pressure of thinking original thoughts and transcribing those thoughts simultaneously. But by using Copywork, these other styles of dictation and someone else's writing, you're actually training your kids to become fluent spellers and punctuators. The same way they learn to speak. You didn't teach them to speak by saying, okay, sweetheart, you're 2 years old. Here's how a sentence works. I would like a banana. And I need you to know this is a pronoun. This is the future conditional. This is a noun, right? You didn't say that. Your kids, my granddaughter, who's coming up on 1.5 years, they just babble at you. They string together words. They're doing the best they can. And they keep copying what you say. Until they get it right, until it's fluent, till it's easy. Understood? The goal is not to worry about whether they're making mistakes in their writing. It's to ask them, not, did you make mistakes, correct your errors? It's to say, do you like your choices? Do you like your choices? Go back and make sure you like all your choices for punctuation. Make sure you like all your choices for spelling. That gives them some power, the ability to even say to you, yeah, you know what? I used the lowercase on purpose for White House, even though he was talking about the actual White House in DC, because he's the kind of kid who doesn't like the White House. And so he's deliberately trying to disrespect it. Wouldn't that be amazing if your child could tell you all those complex thoughts and meant it, and you could go, whoa, that wasn't even a mistake. That was intentional. Or this girl wrote this whole free write. This is a student of mine from years ago. She wrote a whole free write on running. She was a soccer player. And I was a new writing instructor for Brave Writer, my company. I was the only writing instructor. And so I went through and I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I helped her punctuate it. And when we reread it, it lost all its energy. Why? Because it was about running, and it originally was a run-on sentence. Obviously, that's the perfect form for a free write about running. You should be exhausted by the end. There should be no place to pause. There should be no commas. It should just be suck in a lot of breath and then haul all the way through that passage until you get to the end, right? Because that's what running demands. So what we're looking for with our kids is facility. Not accuracy, facility, authority, the ability to choose. And Brave Writer is going to help you get there. That's what our programs do. The dart, the arrow, the boomerang, and the slingshot train you in the vocabulary, the activities, the kinds of conversations that you can have that are natural, that will flow around those subject areas. I want you to know this. We understand that you need to track progress. We know it's very difficult for you to just be like, okay, Julie, I'll just go with the flow like I'm from 1967, a flower power child. I get it. So we have included inside the guidelines for each of these programs a skills tracker so that you can look and see, wow, okay, so this dart talked about commas and periods, but we got pretty far, but we have never done dashes. So I'm just going to keep track of dashes and look for an opportunity using one of the passages, right? So we've got a skills tracker for you to stay up to date with each child. And then we also have a weekly planning tool that helps you plan what you're going to do during the week. So let's pivot now and talk about Copywork Dictation, what we call Copywork French style dictation, and what I call reverse dictation. So in the dart in particular, we give you a passage the first week that is meant for Copywork. In the arrow and inside the boomerang, we also give you passages, but I want you to note that This passage in the arrow, I'm going to show you how long this passage is. The arrow passage is about 2 paragraphs. A dart, and that's for like your 11 and 12-year-olds. A dart passage is for your 8 to 10-year-olds, so it's much shorter. But when we get to the boomerang level, we're ridiculous. We give you an uncopyable length of a passage. Look at this thing. It goes on for a whole page. We do not expect your kids to copy the whole thing. I mean, they can, and if they want to, and it's good practice for them, they can, but that's not why we do it. At the boomerang level, we're not only teaching you how to handwrite, copy, spell, punctuate, and grammar. We want to give you a meaty enough text to do literary analysis, okay? So starting with high school, boomerang and the slingshot level, the passages are really, really long. At the dart and arrow level, they are more appropriate, but does that mean you still have to copy the whole thing? No. You might have a child, for instance, you might have several children. I had 5. So you might have like a 7-year-old who is just going to copy one word. And you might have a 12-year-old who could actually lengthen the passage and write more from the same book. You're going to determine how much writing your child does based on their skill set, not based on what we tell you. We include a passage that enables us to teach you all the intentional stuff around spelling, punctuation, literary craft, and grammar. And then it's up to you to determine the length that is appropriate for each of your kids. So what is copywork? Copywork is taking this passage, and we're really nice to you. We actually give you the passage. I'm going to show you on an individual sheet that you can simply print, and it's in bigger font size. And this can be given to your child as a model. So every single one of our darts, arrows, and boomerangs has the passage on its own sheet of paper. You could literally use the handbook on your iPad and only print these pages. So copywork is just copying by hand for the length of time that your child can handle. And remember, the rule is this: age plus 1 minute equals the attention span of any child. So a 7-year-old can give you 8 good minutes. And for some 7-year-olds, 8 minutes of physically handwriting is exhausting. So do half. Build up. Have them take this passage and copy it over a whole week, a couple words a day. Give yourself permission to not set a high bar of length and duration, but focus instead, as Charlotte Mason would say, on quality, on the fact that they are giving their best effort. I used to say to my kids all the time, the second you feel your attention flag, tell me, because I will stop you. I do not want you working beyond when you're paying your best attention. So with some of my kids, that lasted like a minute at the beginning or less, because they have to build their stamina. And you have time to do that because you homeschool. That's the good news. So copywork is just copying the exact passage. The second feature of what we do in Brave Writer is something we call French style dictation. I lived in France for a year in college, and I also had the good fortune of having neighbors who were from France with children who lived here. The French they have just as nutty a language as we do in terms of silent letters and difficult spellings, but they do not use spelling books. They use copywork and dictation to teach spelling. And here's the steps they take. You copy the passage the first day, and then a little bit further in the week, they do something that I call French style dictation. They take the same passage and they eliminate some of the words, and they put blanks for where those words will be filled in by the student. And they hand that sheet of paper out to the students, and the teacher from the front of the room reads the passage through, and the child reads along, listening for the word that goes in the blank. Does that make sense? Imagine now your child is starting to learn how to transcribe at the pace of reading, but they're not responsible for every single word. What this also means is you can create French style dictation of passages and isolate words that your child wants to work on. So if your child's always struggling with because, find a passage and leave because as a blank. What if you want to teach them there, and there? Find a passage that has all three, leave all three blank, and see if they can do it within the context of that passage, listening for meaning, supplying the right homonym. The reason this is a powerful tool as a mid-step is that it is very difficult to go straight from copywork to what is called full dictation, where you hand your child, and we provide these to you as well, where you hand your child a fully blank sheet of paper and you read the passage and they write all the words, all the punctuation marks. That requires a whole other level. But at least they're not also having to generate the ideas. They are now just focused exclusively on spelling, on handwriting, on punctuation, on hearing the word correctly and transcribing it to their page. That is the most training they're going to get for the mechanics of writing that will eventually borrow itself into their original free writing, because they're learning how to hold meaning and spelling together. This other study that I read talked about how important context is to spelling. And I think when we divorce context from spelling, we end up with these weird anomalies where people can spell for the test, but then they misspell in email. It's very common. I was a spelling bee champ in 4th grade when I was a kid. But if you see my 4th grade diary, I have all kinds of spelling errors. Because when I was just writing for pleasure, my mathematical type brain was not kicking into gear. I didn't have enough practice with those words in a meaning-rich context. So that's what copywork and French style dictation do. And then the third practice then is dictation. Simply reading the passage aloud, and your child is now going to write it just as they heard it. Can you give them help, clues, spell the word, hint with a lot of intonation? Yes! And we teach you how to do that inside Brave Learner Home and in our guidelines. We make sure that you know how to do dictation, not just that you've heard about it and hope you're doing it right. And then finally, the very last style of dictation that we teach inside our products and in our space is something I made up for my kids. I call it reverse dictation. You've seen other programs who have various editing kinds of workbooks or whatever. What this is basically is I take the passage and we rewrite it and we remove all the punctuation and capital letters, and then I deliberately misspell some words. Then I give my child a pen and I say, edit it, fix it, make it look right. And they go through and I even taught them some of the shorthand things like the Pilcrow for indentation of a paragraph, which they love to use. Just all the little things that help them feel all this power, because, oh my gosh, it feels so good, right? To correct somebody else's mistakes. I mean, come on, you've been on Facebook. That's what everybody does. So we're letting them do that. And then I give them a penny for each correction they make, including identifying a misspelled word. That's a penny. And then respelling it accurately. That's yet another penny. Why do we do this? Because I don't know, pennies are a great incentive for some unknown reason. You could use peanut M&Ms, whatever works in your family. But my kids got to the point where they were like, Mom, make 64 mistakes. I want 64 cents. And then I would go through and find a way to make 64 mistakes in this piece of writing so they could go through and make all the changes. These are ways that we engage the whole person in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And we do it using gorgeous literature like Skunk and Badger for our 8 to 10-year-olds, like Midsummer Mayhem for our Arrow level users. Those are our 11 and 12-year-olds. Like Dragon Hoops for our Boomerang level. And I think I forgot to bring in my Slingshot level, but Braiding Sweetgrass, one of those books. We use living literature. And why do we do this? Because we're more engaged when we care. Somebody just writing random sentences about the scenery or history, historical information that's just removed from context that you don't care about. It's very hard to internalize the rules and the values around commas because you don't care. But my goodness, after I read that Wilbur passage, don't you just want to go read that to your 8-year-old now and have them act out each of those verbs? I mean, that's the beauty of this. Now, I had told you before about the skills tracker, and I do want to show you what that looks like. I have the one for the Slingshot here. So we've listed for you all the punctuation marks and then the parts of speech. And we even have a box so you can identify other skills, like if you wanted to put synonyms in here, or homophones. You could add that and track it. And what's really cool is we show a little clock, which means save for later, because I know you can't do everything at once and you want to give yourself credit for being deliberate about saving it for later. Then we have a pair of shoes, which stands for in progress. And then we have a check mark, meaning done. Now, does that mean mastered? No, it just means for now, you gave it enough attention to feel like, okay, we can move on and look at something else. And obviously, we go through these in a cyclical way in all of our products. So you're going to come over these again and again. You can print one per month. You can print one per child. It's totally up to you. And then our week with Slingshot or Dart or Arrow or Boomerang is going to show you prep to do. Things like read the passage, review possible questions to ask the passage, read the what to note and how to explore sections, pick a copywork strategy, plan the copywork. We even have a place for you to get candles, treats, colored pens, or with teens, go to a coffee shop and do your copywork there. And then selecting discussion questions. Then in the other column, we have the preparation to do with your kids. Now this is with the teens, but the ones for Dart, Arrow, and Boomerang would be with your younger kids. So we have them highlighting things with an array of highlighters, setting copywork goals, recording breakthrough insights, celebrating with your child. And then monthly, we talk about hosting a book club party or selecting a passage of your own that you want to save in your own copywork notebook. So these trackers and planners are available with all 4 levels, Dart, Arrow, Boomerang, and Slingshot, and they are tailor-made to go with those levels. Many people ask me, is this a complete program in and of itself, Dart, Arrow, Boomerang, Slingshot? They are complete for literature and mechanics. But if we're going to talk about original writing, I wrote a book called The Writer's Jungle. It's 21 years old, and it is comprehensive. It gives you, the parent, the confidence to guide your child in original writing. The processes, the pedagogy, the thinking. This has transformed tens of thousands of families. It is the standard bearer. It was the first thing I wrote. So it has everything in here. The opening chapter goes into detail about all the stuff we're talking about today. So that's The Writer's Jungle. And then we have writing projects, or what you might call writing assignments, but I hate the word assignments, so we call them projects. And they last a month each one, and we have them at all different levels. So for the 5 to 8-year-olds, we have something called Jot It Down. This is for kids who don't even use pencils and can't read yet, and yet they can still do projects. For instance, our most popular project for this crowd is the fairy tale project, where you are going to read a fairy tale like The Frog Prince, and then you're going to read it in all different versions. You might even watch like the Disney movie of The Frog Prince. You're going to read lots of versions, and then your child is going to narrate their own and create their own little book, and you're going to help them do it so that they start owning the storylines and discovering their internal writing voice even before they know how to spell. The worst thing we can do to little kids is make them think that writing is about spelling. It's not. I mean, if God forbid your child lost their hands in an accident, they could still be writers as long as they can externalize language someone else can transcribe for them. Now, we want them to learn to transcribe for themselves, but it's not essential. What is essential is access to that internal voice. So Jot It Down is for the youngest level, and it would go beautifully with The Writer's Jungle and the Dart. And we call that our beginning writer's bundle. So if you are looking for a complete program, that's what it is. It's these 3 products: Writer's Jungle, Jot It Down, and the Dart. Now here's what's really cool. I did webinars inside the Brave Learner Home that tells you what order to go in, how to use all 3 products, how they relate to each other, what time of year to start one and not the other. That's all there for you. And if you buy the bundle, you're automatically in Brave Learner Home. You'll go into the Start Your Journey folder, and all of that information will be there for you. At the next level, the Growing Writers Bundle, we feature partnership writing, and that can go with either the dart or the arrow. You can select either one depending on the ages of your kids, dart, arrow, and it also includes the writer's jungle. How do you decide? If you've got this huge family of kids like I did, I have this rule. You simply aim for the middle. So if you've got 5 kids, 13 down to 5, you're going to go by the 8 or 9-year-old. And so I would say the partnership writing bundle is perfect. It'll have enough for your older kids and stuff you can modify down for your younger kids. Will you pick the dart or the arrow? Well, look at the book titles and decide based on the literature what your kids really would enjoy hearing you read. Read aloud time means you're reading or an audiobook is reading. Your kids aren't reading the books. They're listening. So don't worry about whether they're at the right level to read the books we've selected. Worry about them being at the right level to hear the books. Read the content, figure out what the information is. The Writer's Jungle is a manual written to the parent. It is not for the child. I saw that question. So do not hand any of these products to your kids. These are manuals for you so that you will become a natural leader in writing. The last thing any child wants is for a parent to say, here, go do all the writing in this and let me know when you're done. No, I give you a month-long project. You drink your tea in the morning, let your kids binge out on YouTube. You read the project, internalize what it's about, assemble your materials, and then pick a morning to just start. Don't announce, hey, we're doing writing today. Start. Just start living the actual activity with your kids. The very first project in partnership writing is secret codes. Don't ruin it by announcing it. Get the lemon juice, get the codes out, and start writing your kids secret messages at the kitchen table and tell them they have to decode them, and I promise you, they'll get into it. Assign it to them as a project they ask to turn into you. Suddenly, oh, mom is trying to force us to have fun, right? We explain how to do all of this. So we've got that for you in the Brave Learner Home. So beginning writer's bundle is jot it down, dart, and the writer's jungle. The growing writer's bundle is either dart or arrow based on the ages of your kids, partnership writing, and the writer's jungle. And then the middle school bundle includes the writer's jungle and faltering ownership. This is a very meaty program, could easily take 2 years. You can also do any of these activities more than once as long as you change the topic, which is a good idea. That's how you grow as a writer, is you don't just do one interview and then you're like done with interviews. You do lots of interviews. But this program is so beautiful, perfect for junior high, great to prepare them for high school. And you will pick the arrow or the boomerang to go with this, plus the writer's jungle. And then finally, we have the college prep bundle, which is the slingshot plus the program Help for High School, which for some reason is not on my table. I don't know where it is, sorry. Help for High School looks like the writer's jungle. It's about that size. And that one orients itself around high school. I actually just made a mistake. I'm so sorry. There is a bundle for high school that has the boomerang and Help for High School in it. So there's the faltering ownership bundle, and then there is early high school, which is just the boomerang and Help for High School, and then the college prep bundle, which is slingshot and Help for High School. I hope that was not clear as mud. So let me wind up because we're coming up on the hour mark. We teach the mechanics of writing using a prescriptive model that allows students to contextualize spelling, grammar, and punctuation within the riches of living literature. We give you guidance so that you are not just left high and dry trying to figure out how to do it. Our staff is trained and supervised to produce what actually works for our families. The special we have running right now is that if you purchase Dart for a year, Arrow for a year, Boomerang for a year, or the Slingshot plus the Help for High School in the College Prep bundle. So if you buy any of those 4 options, you will automatically get free lifetime access to Brave Learner Home, where we are actually going to do each of these months together as a community. There are coaches in there. We do live webinars, we have trainings, and we have discussion. And the final thing that you need to know is that each of these ends with a fabulous book club party. So it is not all hard work and no play. It is play, play, play. And those book club party ideas are a complete blast. And we love to share those together inside Brave Learner Home and get ideas from each other and just celebrate the joy of being in a community. You know how lonely it can get in homeschooling, where nobody knows what you're doing or appreciates the value. Or, you know, you finish Charlotte's Web and you want to cry and you want everyone to cry with you. Well, now we've got the crying brigade waiting for you inside Brave Learner Home to cry over all the sad endings and all the happy endings, okay? So I hope that you will join us this year. The book reveal replays are on YouTube. We will save this on YouTube and also on Instagram so that you can watch it again. Please share it with your friends. I am involved in all of these activities, and it is just an honor to have you a part of our world. We know what we do works. We know what we do works. It is not avant-garde. It is not just Julie's good ideas. We know it works. It's been proven in research, and we have seen it over and over in our students. So we look forward to having you. Can't wait. I will be doing another one of these webinars next week to talk about literary devices and literary analysis. And by the way, who talks about writing craft in education? Nobody, at least not the way I do. Professional writers, we care about it. So we're going to talk about it. So sign up for that webinar too, or show up at 1 p.m. on Facebook or Instagram, and I'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a fabulous afternoon.